working on it. We're live.
Woo!
What do you think, Mike? You want to try this? You feel you okay? You want to jump in and just do the show? Just want to do the show. See if it's going to be even remotely as good as yesterday's show that no one will see. It sucks because that was a great show.
Yeah.
That was a great show. And no one will ever see it. So this is what you get instead. Welcome, everyone, to Level 1 GM Episode 6, where we're going to talk about combat. Again.
My favorite.
Yes. This show comes out just after an episode of Deadlands, Blood Moon. It being my very first campaign, long-term campaign that I'm running as GM. Therefore, I am the not smirch GM. And I am joined all the time by this guy over here, my smart GM, Mike. And today, once again, we are graced with the presence of the other smart GM, Laura. Together we will talk about combat. All right. So, this week on Blood Moon, I threw some more combat at you. And this is only the second time since the first episode that we did some pretty heavy combat. And what did I do? Okay. You are in Colchidi. It is the evening, and through a series of events, you are aware that there are two howling beasts out there somewhere. Howling that you recognized from an episode before. That you've seen the aftermath of what happens after hearing this howling. And two hellhounds wander up the main street of Colchidi. And chaos ensues. Now, ultimately, I've learned nothing from all of these episodes with you, Mike. So, I essentially threw two big tanks at you, and you guys chose to immediately start, beating these tanks down. And this ended up taking, another 2-hour combat session before you were actually able to stop them. So let's talk a little bit about what things that were done well, things that weren't done so well. Mike, let's start with you. What was your sort of overall feeling about that particular encounter with those two hounds?
As a player, all indication for me was that the creature or creatures in question were a threat. Previous night we had not encountered, but been near to what we assumed to be the same thing, howling wolves. In the morning, we looked into a nearby campsite where the people there were killed. Torn apart by these animals, presumably the same animals. They're large wolf prints leading away, biting scratch marks on the bodies. So we, as the players, well, myself as a player at least, believe them to be the same animals invading the town. Immediately felt the need to fight them due to the damage they'd done to some other group of people. You never know with. You're never aware if the GM actually had, if it was just like a scripted, these people are going to die no matter what, if there was like some, back behind the scenes role done to it. But so we went into the fight immediately and quickly discovered that basically Laura and I didn't do any damage to him. And I think I ended up doing 1 point of damage to one of them, but I got like 3 raises on my hit and then like a couple raises in my damage. Like I had to really, really hit hard. Phil could do damage with prayer style stuff, like divine style stuff, and Patrick actually was the most effective with his magical abilities. But we didn't know that going in. We hadn't run into him before, not in a pure combat sense. We didn't know what they were really. Just knew they were big dog things.
Laura.
Yeah.
Give us your first impressions, your walk through there with that combat.
It was particularly an interesting combat for me and my character, because earlier in the evening, part of Savage Worlds, for those of you who are watching that maybe haven't played a Savage Worlds campaign before, is when you're building your character, you can take edges and hindrances. So you can take things that are really helpful for your character, and then they encourage you to take about 3 hindrances that give you some more points to put in different places, but they're fun, kind of making your character a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more real, with real problems and real things that hinder them in the game. And I had realized early on in the session that I had taken a hindrance for my character that I had not been playing. I took a mild-mannered hindrance with my initial thought of how she was going to be. It made sense, but I realized after a few episodes that I had not been playing her as mild-mannered at all, because of the way that she interacts with the other characters. So I messaged Chad, and I said, hey, can I swap out this hindrance, because it's just not working for her, and I haven't really used it or been affected by it. Chad, being the awesome GM that he is and rolls with my crazy character ideas, was like, yeah, sure.
Hell
yeah. So we're rolling through the hindrances. I was like, oh, what's going to be just easy to toss in? I found phobia. So I was like, I'll give her a phobia. And probably like 2-3 minutes before these hellhounds showed up, I text Chad and I said, let's make her afraid of dogs. And then here come these dogs. So no prior knowledge whatsoever. So that completely changed how she would react in the situation. She was actually the one, I think, to shoot first in the campaign, or in the session, just out of sheer terror of these things. So playing that and having a major phobia of the thing that is attacking them really changed how she would have reacted in the situation. So she, by nature, just didn't end up doing a lot of damage, and wouldn't have anyway, because I don't have any of my cool mad science-y things quite yet. Still gotta level up a little bit. But it made me, as a player, think differently about how to approach that particular combat. Mike has said before, like, a lot of times combat can become grueling and sometimes boring, because a lot of times players either don't have a full grasp of the things that they can do, so they get into this mindset of that worked this time, so let's try again, I'll do the same thing. And I did that for a while with her, but then I came up with another, like, crazy idea, and that led Mike to do something crazy and allowed our characters to kind of have a funny moment in the midst of this combat. Where we
ineffective, but funny.
Yeah, completely ineffective, but it was humorous and entertaining for both the audience, we hope, and for us.
I think it actually ended up being more effective than you think, Mike. So tell them what you ended up doing near the end of the campaign and how that all played out, because I think that's some fun stuff, and it's creative stuff. Tell them what you did.
Yeah, my character was hiding in a tavern, and shooting out of a window. And when the dog moved away from her point of view and her line of sight, she went down into the tavern, tried blocking the door. Nothing really happened for a couple rounds, so then she felt guilty for leaving her friends out there. She opened the door and decided to lunge at this beast and try and stab it, because that makes sense in a wild person with a phobia just going to do something completely irrational, which then led Mike's character to...
feel the need to save the young doctor who decided to hurl herself into the jaws of a monster. So I ran at it with, he's a shit kicker. Let's be fair. The character I'm playing is a shit kicker.
Indeed.
So I had a rope on me, and I tried to rope and ride the werewolf thing And the rope happened. Ride didn't.
But that rope allowed to happen because you had it roped. It allowed Phil's character, the good Reverend, to walk up and just unload what was it, like 4 shots into the thing's head, which ultimately was enough damage to finally put that thing down. So it was that really what it was, being able to thinking outside the box was certainly helpful in that situation. But here's what I think, having looked back on that combat and looking back on session 1's combat, and there's something that I still don't do very well. And Laura, it is something that you've brought up in the past, and that's when creating an encounter, making sure you're creating an encounter based on what the characters that you're actually playing with. I come from a storytelling background of creating an interesting scenario first, and then just dropping people into it and seeing what the fuck happens. And you had some different advice for me. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think first off, I'd say it's simply a difference of DM styles. I think that there's a lot of merit and a lot of value for the DM creating the scenario, dropping the characters and seeing what they do. I tend to DM more in the mindset, and it's probably because I DM mostly modules, so the scenarios are already pre-written for me. But if I'm looking to change or update or do something a little bit differently than what's written in the module, I almost always look at the characters that I have, look at their classes. I DM mostly in D&D too, so that is helpful because I have an idea of what each class is capable of. And then build the combat scenario or add things to it based on that. So if I know that I've got a group where there's not a lot of magic in the group, I probably wouldn't put a monster that really is resistant to any kind of physical damage. Because 1, that's going to take forever. They're going to have to just slog through it. And 2, it becomes tedious for the characters and frustrating for the characters when they feel like they're not doing something. So I think the advice that I gave you at the end of just another way to look at that combat was potentially knowing ahead of time that these hellhounds really needed magic or divine magic, I guess, to harm them, and that half of your party didn't have that ability. I would have maybe, instead of done 2 hellhounds, do 1 hellhound and then a bunch of little minions that are really easy to pick off. So
army of chihuahuas.
Yeah, an army of chihuahuas.
Little hell chihuahuas, yes.
Little demon chihuahuas. But that way Phil and Patrick could have really focused their energy on killing the big thing, and Mike and I could have focused our energy on picking off the horde of rampaging chihuahuas.
Right.
In the end,
your immortal soul.
I think that, and what that I think sort of leads me to is that I think one of the big problems that I have as a GM is I still look at scenarios, I still build encounters and entire scenarios based on how I would play it. And, and I think that, you guys have played with me like long enough. You kind of know how I like to play most of the time, even regardless of the character I'm playing. I'm not pull out my weapon of choice and start killing shit. That's not generally how I do it. But that is not a good way to GM, correct?
Well, it's a trapping a lot of GMs fall into, I think, where a GM likes to think about how they would do things, and it's every time you see one of those memes about what my riddle is, and it's 2 + 2 = 4. What my party thinks the riddle is, and they're doing like advanced calculus. That's because you're thinking with your brain about how you would immediately attack this thing or solve this problem. Good GM and good GMing, you should 100% of the time remove yourself and your biases from the situation. You do not exist in this world. You do not exist whatsoever. Your creatures exist, your encounters exist, the NPCs around you exist, your traps, whatever, what have you, but you do not exist. Your decision-making process does not exist. The players exist, and you need to think about how they would think about the situation, how their characters would handle the situation. And that's it's a big ask for sure. You can't totally put yourself in the shoes of other people. You never really truly know what people are going to do. As Laura referred to it yesterday, the Crawford effect is 100% a thing that can happen. My brother or myself are known to be a little bit agents of chaos when it comes to playing characters in a campaign, but they shooting a man in the head. But we with a good character.
That was a beautiful moment. That was. Yeah.
But still, you need to plan as such. You're not going to get it perfect, but you need to plan in that way, because if you're thinking about the way you would handle it, you're probably getting it wrong for the way they would handle it.
Right. Anything to add to that, Laura?
Not really, no. I think Mike kind of nailed it. And I think that's why that transition from GM to player and player to GM can oftentimes be a challenging transition, at least at the beginning, because I know for me, I played a lot before I started GMing, and so in the very first instance that I started GMing, I still had player brain and had to think beyond that. And now that I've GM'd a couple times, I sometimes struggle in-game to not think of things like the GM, or to try and think of how this GM's mind works. How can I figure out what they're really trying to do here? And that becomes a challenge for me as a player. Right. And sometimes I think it makes me an annoying player, because I oftentimes jump to... I'm in a campaign on Saturdays that I think I am absolutely the most annoying character ever. But I sort of built her in this way. I built her as a divination wizard, so I had like visions and stuff. But it lets me lean into my weird mystery-solving mind that I have, where I try and figure out what the secret is the entire time.
Cool.
And then I frustrate the GM when I figure out the secret before they're ready to reveal the secret. And I know this about myself, and I apologize, Mike, and I apologize, Chad, because this is how I am.
We are fully aware that that's how you are. So now, yes, okay. So obviously, yes, I built another. I built another encounter based kind of on what would my character do in this situation? Wrong thing to do. What I also did that was kind of wrong is I threw 2 tanks at you guys, and kind of knowing, I guess, if I really think about it, based on what we've already sort of leaned into with this campaign, that yes, obviously combat was going to happen. But here's another problem that I have that I need to work on, and that is I get just as involved in those combat game mechanics.
The competition of the...
so much so that I actually forgot the point of having these 2 things walking through Kochiti, really until the very end, when I remembered, fuck, I'm using this encounter to provide you guys some information. And also because I got tied up in that, I also lost track of the pacing. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about not only the idea of forgetting about the whole point of this thing, but also about that pacing.
I went first. Go ahead and go, Laura.
Yeah, I think it's important, especially when you're crafting your own campaign, to always remember what the purpose is of that moment. I don't know that I have a lot to add to that. Mike, you've got a really good system that you talked about yesterday that I found really good.
The thing I do, and nobody's ever said anything about it, so I don't know if anybody's ever noticed me do it, but I'll make a small note for myself. I have this beautiful table here That's it's across 1-inch squares for a map, nice glass board. So I make all sorts of notes and HP and AC and stuff like that. Stuff I need to write out here, but something I always write at the beginning. Well, I try to always write at the beginning of a combat or an upcoming combat is the point, the goal, because there's often a goal as a GM for the encounter, and it isn't just they're bored, have them fight stuff. There should be even if the goal is as simple as world building and providing tension, like a good example of that is for Sunday's campaign, when they were on the boat heading north, I had them attacked by a random bandit other boat that was able to catch up with them because it was a smaller vessel and quicker. It was less weighted down by what have yous. Spoilers, there's no greater enemy there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were going through contested lands, sort of. I made it clear that these are contested lands. There's no real rule of law here, and that it was pretty obvious that they were a shipping vessel of some sorts. So to emphasize the danger of the region that they were in, I had them attacked by people who just wanted the things they had. Another example for Sunday, we just had a Hydra. They just dealt with a Hydra attack. Well, the reason we had this show up is twofold. I wanted a truly chaotic combat because there wasn't. They haven't dealt with a whole lot of that yet. In which there are, in a lot of combats, there's sides. Right? It's clearly Thursday, for instance, it was us versus the werewolves things, the dog things, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The week before, the way I set up this combat is. They saw looters coming out of a burning building. And they're like, okay, well, he's giving us the option to stop looters in this building. And then I had an ogre run out of the nearby swamp in the woods. And they go, oh, well, okay, I guess the real fight is we got to fight this ogre. He's going to attack these random looters. We need to protect them. Well, no, I had the ogre stop and wave his arms, yelling and trying to warn people because 4 flail snails that are the size of like VW buses. They're snails the size of buses that have giant ankylosaurus clubs on their heads come flying out behind them. They went, well, shit. Okay, so we got to stop these things from stampeding through everything. And then I had one of those get eaten by a Hydra. So I set up this scenario in which going into the fight, and they had an entire week to think about this. They had no idea who was going to help or hinder them. And the point of that entire fight was to provide critical thinking on their part and find the bad guy. And 2, to showcase an NPC that was about to show up with incredible abilities. So it needed to be lethal. I needed to provide something that was going to do damage and hurt. So I'm going to give him a bunch of different teams to worry about. I'm going to give him a bunch of different damage dealers, spread them out, spread them thin, and see how they react. Now, they did a lot better than I thought they were going to do. I fully expected to drop 1 or 2 of you.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, it turns out Josh's character could tank God, I think. Just face tank God. He was constantly getting hit, but because of barbarian and many feats and blah blah blah, at one point he turned
supporting cleric.
Yeah,
I saved his ass.
I don't know. I think he mitigated more damage with his feet than was ever healed on him. But
it's like beyond healing. I did some Buffy support shit.
It's true.
But
it's true.
Josh was incredible, and that session was awesome.
Yes, he was healed and buffed, and the enemies around him were nerfed, and he was able to, due to feats, turn 43 damage into 11 at one point. Like it just that's shit, that's 32 damage knocked off the top that he just didn't have to take because of different stuff. So it Luke would like to be noted that he yelled sugar cereals at him. That's true.
You did.
He did yell that. But it still provided the point. And the point was hurt him.
Right.
Kill stuff around him, hurt them, and then when this NPC shows up, the NPC can properly show their power level.
Right.
Because the fight was irrelevant. I don't care if they win or lose. The power level, the point was to show the power level of the NPC that would wander in later.
That brings up an interesting question, and that is that as players, do you walk in to a combat scenario, to an encounter, assuming that you could or should win that encounter? And then as GMs, do we have to provide them that ability to win? I mean, does that have to be our goal as well all the time? I'm assuming no, from what you just said.
Go ahead.
Go, Laura.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Start, Laura.
First, I want to point out that with the combat that you created on Sunday, you essentially just created 2020, where it was a bad thing, and then an even worse thing, and then an even worse thing, and then a holy shit, we're all gonna die thing. Yeah.
And we all lived and made it through.
Yeah. Mike essentially created 2020 in a combat scenario. It was great. No, I don't think... I think from a player standpoint, I try and go into every scenario with the mindset that I could die, because death is a very real possibility. And as a player, I try not to. I won't say that I never expect, but I try not to expect that the GM has created something that we will automatically win. I also think the idea of winning and losing in D&D is not problematic, but challenging, because it's not necessarily a game that you're ultimately looking at an end goal of winning. In a way, it's a story that you're all collaboratively telling together. I do try and make combats realistic for the players that I'm working with, unless it's for the purpose of the story. If there's a story reason why they would come across something that they absolutely cannot beat, that is well beyond where they're at, my hope is that they would realize that this is a story moment and run. But not always. And that's sometimes how you wind up with TPKs, when you're like, I was using this incredibly, you will not win this situation because it was needed as part of the story. I don't roll
to seduce the dragon. Don't do that. Why? Don't talk to the dragon.
Well, here, for example, I'm changing this so I feel fine with this being a spoiler. So the next thing that I'm planning on DMing is the Tyranny of Dragons saga. Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. As written, that campaign literally opens with your party members walking into a town that is legit just being attacked by a dragon as level 1 characters. So that's a scenario where level 1 characters cannot beat a young blue dragon. Just can't. So having that at least start, it's a cool start because it allows people to see, okay, this is the kind of campaign it's going to be. But I'm changing it for the group that we're playing with, because I know for a fact that if I were to say, you guys are all walking together up a hill towards this city of Greenest, and you see a flying blue dragon attacking the city, all of you
can I be the player? Can I be the player in this?
You see a giant, young blue dragon spouting acid flame across the city. What do you do?
I'm going to leave. Is there a horse nearby and get on in right away?
You all were right.
Well,
guess
we're not going there.
So because I know my players, I'm going to change the beginning of the campaign, because I know y'all would turn and run, and then I'd be like, well, there goes my session. See you later. I can't do anything.
But yeah. I think it's often a new player bad habit of thinking you can win D&D. Particularly toxic players never lose that.
Yeah.
Thinking you can sometimes win Dungeons and Dragons. That's not the goal. But I think everybody falls into the trapping of occasionally looking at combat as a purely video game win or lose scenario. I think it's on the onus of the GM. You're allowed to provide impossible scenarios. You're allowed to present difficult tasks. You're allowed to make it anything you want, so long as it fits your narrative and fits your story. But you are required, as the GM, as part of your preparedness, to think about what if. What if, despite all of my explanation and warnings and the red flags I'm going to put up and the stop signs that I will clearly mount in the ground, what if they decide to go ahead with the thing that I have presented as impossible? And if you get to that scenario and you've gone through all those things and you haven't thought of that answer, and your answer is simply, well, I guess we start over, or I need to make something up real quick. You've kind of not done your job, right? In preparedness. That being said, it does happen. This is effectively a game of improv. No matter preparedness will prepare you for Joshua Crawford, and sometimes you just have to roll with the punches a bit. But yeah, I think everyone falls into that sort of unfortunate. We should win this scenario, which I think that's a bad habit that a lot of players have. I know one of my faults as a player that really annoys me is that I get too competitive in combat. And it's not that I don't care that if other people are succeeding, but if we're just outright losing, I'm just like, okay, well, shit, there's nothing I can do here. Why are we doing it? And I get this bad attitude about it. But that's when I, as a player, should be more creative with the encounter. Don't be afraid to run away. Don't be afraid to try things outside the box. And again, as the GM, something that could help me in those situations is a description of my environment, prompting unasked for rolls. If nobody's asked for a nature check in D&D, just go, why don't you roll a nature check?
Right.
Try to give them a little bit of information about the thing. Why don't you roll perception real quick?
Right.
Just provide more information, and maybe because a lot of times in those frustrating scenarios, if you don't have all of the information, it really just feels like you're beating your head into a brick wall. So you start doing the same thing that didn't work before. So why would you stop? It just becomes frustrating. So you're just doing it over and over again.
Right. And that,
I think we were able to. I think it was getting close to that maybe for Thursday, but I think we were able to mostly for the fact that half of us were being successful, and Laura was playing well within her character. I think that it was able to get us all out of the frustrating just bashing bricks together.
Right. But but as you said, I mean, the GM's responsibility in those moments is to, I could sense that things were getting frustrating. And where I got frustrated, of course, is that, I got sucked into those combat moments myself, and because of that, didn't deal well again with something we've talked about in the past, and that's that pacing. And that's really interesting to bring up, the different tools you have at your disposal to help with that pacing, asking for those extra rolls when people aren't getting it, dropping some kind of hint about something, or reminding a player of something, but ultimately being able to steer what's happening in a different direction, which is something that I continue to kind of work on. So,
I think another thing
go ahead.
with pacing that we haven't touched on yet, that we did touch on yesterday, is the idea that as the GM, you have all the information at your disposal, but the players don't. So if at some point we feel like things are running long or people are getting frustrated, maybe I just knock off 20 hit points off of the bad guy. They're not going to know. Or maybe I just decide this is the hit that's going to end it, even if they have hit points left. Or I change the AC of the thing if they're just not hitting it. Which is something I should have done in Strahd with the very first animated armor. I was using what was on D&D Beyond, but it was like 23 AC to hit this armor with level 2 characters. And there's no way a level 2 character is going to hit a 23 AC thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until after the fact that I was using the wrong monster thingy, but I changed it on the fly. So just being flexible and being willing to change those things and not get so absorbed with the rules that you can make it really craft the encounter to the length or
there's a way to nerf that stuff in a way that feels right inside of story too. I've seen Mike do it. I've seen Phil do it. So I'm looking forward to finally playing with you, Laura. So that'll be awesome. All right, let's wrap up. But words of wisdom. Mike, give me one nice little word of wisdom inside of this combat scenario. What should I think about, or what should new GMs think about when getting into combat?
I think we touched on a lot of stuff, but I think something that hasn't been brought up that needs to be said, and it's not a long thing. You as the GM, again, you don't exist. We talked about that earlier. You do not exist within this world. You're simply the narrator running the narrative. So, do not feel as if in combat or any point in the game that it is you versus your players. If you feel that way, you're doing it wrong. You are on the side of the players. You're trying to enjoy the game as much as they are. You're trying to go through the narrative with them. If at any point you find yourself in combat or any other scenario feeling like, damn, they're going to beat you're on the wrong track. You're thinking about it the wrong way. You want them to succeed at all times, unless otherwise specified by your and agreed upon by the entire group, because otherwise you're providing an unhealthy, non-fun environment to not only yourself but your players, and it can become very competitive. Not only you versus them, but them versus each other, and that's how you get toxicity, and that's how groups fall apart.
And I got to say, as a storyteller, to ruin a finale by not letting you get there, I can't even imagine that at all. Yep. Yeah. So let your characters make it to the finale, people. Laura, what do you got for us? Words of wisdom.
I think overall combat, even more so than RP, you can have some very emotional and dramatic moments in RP, but combat is where emotions and frustration as players and as GMs runs, I think, the highest. So taking a step back and remembering that all of you are around a table to play a game. This whole thing is a game, and games are meant to be fun. So just remembering that to maybe not take it as seriously, let yourself have fun, because that's the purpose of a game.
Damn straight. Yeah.
How dare you?
And I can say just from my...
I'm a professional GM. I get paid to do this shit.
Oh, my God.
I wish.
From my experience coming in, newly GMing, all that stuff, that no words ring truer. It's a game, and I need to have fun. Of course, you want your players to have fun. I even want people that are watching to have fun. But yes, when it gets to the point where you as the GM aren't really having fun anymore, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay. Just have a good time. And I'm having a great time. thanks very much for joining us today on this discussion of combat. And remember to catch up if you want to watch all of the different games that we're talking about here. Come over, find us on Twitch. Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, live gameplay there. And if you want to catch up, go over to our YouTube channel. You can see everything pretty much that we've ever done.
One last thing.
Yes, sir.
Perfect and counterbalancing is impossible. Don't get in your head about it.
Yes, that's true as well. Absolutely. So, but if you want to join us on Discord, you got to watch us live. We'll drop the invite there. Come see us. Thanks so much, everybody.
We did not drop it.
Do it right now.
We're doing it. We're gonna banter while he's dropping it into the Discord chat right now.
I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that.
So here's some more witty banter from Laura.
Witty banter.
Ooh, don't open with
This is why
if you want to open with
I'm not a stand-up because I'm not witty or banter like.
Either one of them.
I'll open it right after we cut. Just cut it. Just still recording.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys next time.